Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk to you about my first awakening experience, my initial experience, what in Japanese tradition we would call kensho, my first glimpse of my true nature. It's also a story of a certain time in my life and of the influence on me of a person I call my first Zen teacher, although he was not a member of any established Zen lineage. So, travel with me, if you will, back to the year 1972. It was the tail end of the hippie era, and I was either a late to the party hippie or maybe a hippie wannabe who wished he'd come of age a few years earlier in the swinging 60s, the height of the flower power. I was 19 and in my second year of university. It was a time of British psychedelic progressive folk bands like the Incredible String Band, headed up by Scots Mike Heron and Robin Williamson. May the long time sun shine on you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. May the long time sun shine on you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. May the long time sun shine on you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way home. That was the chorus to their song, a 13-minute long masterpiece called The Very Cellular Song, which became the anthem for some of us at that time, who all shared a common interest in Eastern religion, and especially Alan Watts and Zen. And if you're interested, it's from their 1968 album, The Big Huge. And the chorus happens towards the end of that song. The Big Huge this band also featured at Woodstock. I think they were paid more to attend Woodstock than many of the famous bands you might have heard of. I think they were paid more than the Who, for instance, maybe more than Led Zeppelin. So it's interesting to sort of reflect on the stature of Incredible String Band, given they've largely been forgotten ever since, although not by me. And they became a huge favorite in the UK in the early 1970s. Also on that Big Huge album was a track called Douglas Traherne Harding. And I'll read some of the lyrics from that track. When I was born, I had no head. My eye was single and my body filled with light. And the light that I was the light that I saw by. And the light that I saw by was the light that I was. One light, light that is one, though the lamps be many. And many's the time I crossed the river and saw no tollman, and I needed no ferryman to cross, and enjoyed the world aright. For the sea itself floweth, and warm I was and crowned, and one day walking towards the river, and paid no attention, and I saw the tollman with an angry face, and many's the time I passed his toll gate, paid no silver and paid no fee, but rather did hide my sheep and goats under the bags of oatmeal, and cold I was, no crown did I wear. But if you're walking down the street, why don't you look down at the basement? For sitting there very quietly, there is a man that has no head. His eye is single and his whole body is filled with light. One light, the lamps be many. And as he sits there, so he will walk all among you, and the streets are his and all the people, and even the temples of the whole world. And many's the time he's walked to the river, and seeing the tollman and seeing the ferryman, the light within him leaps to greet them, for he sees that their faces are none but his own. One light, light that is one, though the lamps be many. You never enjoy the world aright till the sea itself floweth in your veins till you are clothed with the heavens and crowned with the stars. Here the writers of this song, I think it's primarily Mike Heron, were in fact merging the writings of Douglas Harding with the poet and philosopher Traherne. I won't go into any particular detail on Traherne, but I do highly recommend checking him out as well. Now, at the time I got the album, I thought the words of this track were quirky and didn't give them much thought, other than to find myself, along with others, singing along with one light that is one, though the lamps be many. I remind you, it was the tail end of the hippie era. It's the sort of thing that we did. And of course, I recognize the reference to what Jesus is attributed with saying in Matthew 6:22, that if your eye is single, your entire body is filled with light. Very mystical. I was drawn to mystical sayings and texts at that time. Then around 1972, my psychology professor announced that he had a Zen master who was coming to give a workshop. And I noticed that he said workshop rather than talk, and that he wouldn't say much about who this teacher was, other than that his name was Douglas Harding. I think he may have also described Douglas as a classic English eccentric and well worth listening to, so I attended the workshop. To say that workshop was a transformative moment for me is a gross understatement. It literally changed my life. As I walked out of the workshop, out of the psychology building, into the quad just outside, a quad full of cherry trees in full blossom, I stopped for a moment, felt lightheaded, and to this day I can recall that me and other fell away. My body fell away. There was an intense feeling of joy, and that everything is all right. Not a feeling of oneness, but rather a realization of oneness that was deep and shook me to my core. Sounds were more intense than usual, and colors were more intense too. I could see every detail of every cherry blossom petal. I have no idea how long the sensation lasted, or that moment lasted, whatever language works best. And I suspect it may have only been a few seconds, but it felt like quite a few minutes. As the initial intensity of the experience wore off, I noticed the key elements of the experience didn't go away. A deep sense of peace at the center of my being, and of being interconnected with everything. I fully expected that feeling to go away over time. I'd read texts on Zen and Zen awakening experiences and Christian mystic experiences, and I read enough to know that they tend to go away. But it didn't. To this day, that has never gone away. That sense of peace and that sense of interconnectedness. So what happened in that workshop that led to my kensho experience? Now, I do not think for a moment that because it happened this way for me, it would necessarily happen that way for someone else. My friends reported a wide range of feelings about the workshop, from wow, just wow, to interesting, but he's a weird old bird, isn't he? Douglas's core teaching is very simple and direct. In this regard, he compares with some of the better teachings, in my opinion, of some of the best Zen masters out there. His book, which I only later discovered he'd written, is simply called On Having No Head. And that pretty much sums up the entirety of his teaching. As he tells it, he was a young man walking in the Himalayas, and he had what he calls his rebirth day. And he says that what caused his rebirth was the realization that he had no head. And he is clear to say that this is no literary gambit or device. He means it quite literally. He was 33 at the time, a very auspicious age, it seems. And as he was walking in one of the most beautiful spots on earth, he suddenly had what he calls an absurdly simple realization. He stopped thinking, reason and imagination, all mental chatter died down. Words failed him, and anyone who knows Douglas knows that is a monumental moment, because he loved to talk. He forgot his name, his humanness, his thingness, and all that until now he had called me or mine. Past and future dropped away. It was as if in that instant he had become brand new, innocent of all memories. There was only the now and what was clearly given in it. And these are basically his words taken from his book, as I wanted to be authentic to the way Douglas described it. And what he found given in it, in that moment, as he looked down, was a pair of khaki pants that terminated at the bottom in some old brown shoes. And then, allowing his gaze to come back up, he scanned up his chest, shirt, terminating upwards in, well, absolutely nothing whatsoever, certainly not a head. Where he thought his head should be was a vast emptiness, an emptiness that contained all things. I should swiftly add that while the experience he described is very much like the one I described as my kensho experience, I had not read his book when I had my experience, nor had he told this part of his story when I had my experience. Now, what he did in his workshop might seem a little bizarre to some. He would invite you to look at yourself and be entirely honest when you do so, and see if you can find a head on the upper part of your chest. There may be, fair warning, this is, I think, a very brilliant man, in my opinion, but he's a British eccentric, and yeah, you would have to be in Douglas's presence. His enthusiasm was infectious. Very, very hard to convey that. He was constantly excited the whole time I knew him for many, many years. Had this beautiful, bright smile on his face the whole time, and never stopped being incredibly excited about this whole thing. So sorry, I'll start that again. He would invite you to look at yourself and be entirely honest, and see if you too can find a head on the upper part of your body, upper part of your chest. There may be a couple of clouds that you label your nose, perhaps, particularly if you have a large one like me, but no head as such. He will quickly add that, of course, he'll answer for you that it's out there in the mirror, not here on your shoulders. You can feel around, and what you've come to call your head, sure enough, is there with touch sensations that your mind puts together and says, whew, I do have a head. For a moment, I thought I'd lost it. But he would say, did you find it? If you're truly honest with yourself, what did you find? Among the workshop activities that he had us do, it would be big no-nos in this time of COVID. And for that reason, I didn't send you all materials to be able to do some of these activities yourselves. He would, one particularly striking activity was that he would take a standard white paper bag, and in Britain they were sort of yay big, if you get that idea. Very standard, a huge number of things in Britain that you would buy would come in these white paper bags, this everywhere. And what he would do is cut off the closed end, so it's open at both ends. And by pure coincidence, I'm guessing it was by pure coincidence, the openings of these bags were just big enough for most people to put their face into. And he would have you partner up with somebody and each put your face in one end of the bag. Now, these bags are maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches long. So the two faces are really close. You're a lot closer to the person at the other end of the bag than you would be in normal social situations. And of course, this experience wasn't for everyone. There's some people that freak out if somebody gets that close to them. But for those that could do the activity, it could be kind of life-changing. Now, what he would, this is obviously quite embarrassing as well, because what he would ask you to do is just pay really close attention to what is at the other end of the bag. He'd invite you to explore every pore, every wrinkle. As I say, this is kind of embarrassing, but we went with it. And he would ask you to, to explore every nook and cranny of the face at the other end of the bag, and to acknowledge that there's a face at the other end of the bag. Then he would suddenly say, now turn your attention 180 degrees round. What do you find at your end of the bag? And he said, if you're entirely honest, all you find is pure void, emptiness, no face, no head. So this, as eccentric and perhaps bizarre as it may seem, was his core teaching: direct, no nonsense, or total nonsense if you're one of those who don't get what he was talking about. He would say that if you found a head at your end of the bag, then that would be a wrong-headed notion. And I remember to this day his delightful chuckle he'd make as he made all puns like that. He came out with a huge number of them, and I can't remember even half of them. After his experience, he went off to read every book he could on mystical traditions and Eastern philosophy, and he lighted upon Zen. He felt the frustration of friends who would say things like, well, of course I can't see my own head, so what? And he would reply, so everything. But it conveyed little to these people. Then he discovered the Heart Sutra, which reads in part, no eye, no ear, no nose, just emptiness. He then discovered a perplexing, he read about the perplexed young Tongshan, 807 to 869, and his teacher, who was not in the Zen tradition. And the student struggled and said, why does the Buddha say things like, I don't, like this in the Heart Sutra, when I clearly have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth? And the teacher, having some wisdom, responded that he wasn't really sure, but perhaps one day he would have the opportunity to go and ask a Zen master. And Tongshan's question went unanswered until many years later he came across a mirror-still pool and discovered exactly what the Heart Sutra was talking about. Over a century earlier, Huineng, 637 to 712, the 6th patriarch of Zen, gave his own famous advice on the topic. He said to his brother monk, Ming, to call a halt to his cravings and cogitations, that he should see in this very moment what his own face looks like, the face you had before you were born. At that point, as Douglas told it, Ming had a deep realization of his true nature. Douglas taught that according to Daito Kokushi, 1281 to 1337, all Zen koans, all 1700 of them, are simply pointers to our original face and featureless face, and of that, and that of it. Mumon said, you cannot describe or draw it. You cannot praise it enough or perceive it. No place can be found in which the original face, it will not disappear even when the universe is destroyed. And so his teaching went on, drawing more and more on his sayings and teachings as Zen masters. He spoke of one of Huineng's successors, Shitu, 700 to 790, who said, do away with your throat and lips and let me hear what you have to say. A monk replied, I have no such things. Then Shitu replied, you may enter the gate. And as was his wont, Douglas would throw in a little Rumi into the mix and quote Rumi as saying, behead yourselves, dissolve your whole body into vision and become seeing, seeing, seeing.